Um, the mission of the Game Commission is to manage all bird and mammal populations and their supporting habitat for current and future generations. Let's see if we click in here. Oh, okay. Sorry, small technical difficulty, but got it straightened out there. And bald eagles are a great conservation success story to show how we can implement our mission for a particular species. In only 30 years, we have gone from a species that was simply a remnant population almost extirpated from the state to a healthy, self-sustaining population of over 300 nesting pairs. And in 2014, the successful recovery of bald eagles was recognized by its change in status from threatened to a protected species. An adult bald eagle is probably the most easily recognized bird in Pennsylvania. With its bright white head and tail and large size, most people are pretty comfortable identifying it. Just to give you an idea how large these birds actually are, they're about 3 feet tall with a wingspan of 6.5 feet and weigh anywhere from 6.5 to 14 pounds. But it takes 5 years for a young bald eagle to get that diagnostic white head and tail. They actually leave the nest chocolate brown. This young bird here is close to fledging. They move through a series of light and dark patterns, and bald eagles without white heads and tails are often mistaken for other species. They're mistaken for the common red-tailed hawk, well-known turkey vulture, and the rarer but still present in Pennsylvania golden eagle. Bald eagles build the largest nests of any bird in Pennsylvania, with an average nest being 5 to 6 feet across and 2 to 4 feet tall. The nests tend to grow over the years as adults add material to the nest each season. As I said, bald eagles are constantly adding material to their nest. In fact, we've seen them working on nests every month of the year in Pennsylvania. In addition to just their building activity, the fact that they have large nestlings that leap around on the nest as they grow produces a lot of wear and tear on the nest. And so the adults are constantly refurbishing them and working on them, especially between nesting attempts. All this building can result in nests that are much larger than that average that I gave you before. The largest nest that's been reported was actually 10 feet by 20 feet. Eagles require large mature trees with horizontal branches to support their nest, and they can be found primarily in riparian forests along healthy rivers and other large bodies of water. Disturbance can be an issue for eagles, but it's a little bit of a challenge to explain that, so we're going to come back to it in just a moment. This is a distribution of the active nesting territories in Pennsylvania in 2015. You can see that the nests are concentrated along waterways, especially large rivers and smaller streams. But you can also notice that there's a lot of remaining habitat in Pennsylvania. We expect that as the population matures, the birds will continue to colonize good habitat in areas that are currently vacant. Now, coming back to the disturbance or tolerance of eagles for activities near their nests, there's a lot of variation from one pair to another, and that's what makes it a challenge to explain to people, because we may have a pair in an urban area that tolerates a lot of human activity, but we can't assume that birds in more wild areas will tolerate those same activities. For example, a pair that has a nest near a highway has demonstrated that vehicles aren't an especially frightening situation for them, and so they might ignore vehicles as long as they don't stop along the roadway. where a pair in our northern tier might be very sensitive even to hikers, before you would even get to vehicles. Eagles are still showing us what they're actually willing to tolerate in some situations, and they're doing that by demonstrating where they build their nests in those areas and what sort of activities are already going on there. We get a lot of questions and concerns about how the eagles take care of themselves in extreme weather conditions. Eagles are warm-blooded and maintain their own body temperature, and they stay warm in the winter partially because they have such good insulation. And when I see this image of from our nest camera last year, what really stands out to me is the snow did not melt across this bird's back. So it's retaining all of its body heat, and it's not escaping to melt that snow. An important feature of insulation is actually that the birds stay dry. And so all birds, including eagles, have oils that they spread on their feathers to help waterproof them. And if we zoom in on this bird during a rainstorm last year, you can see the beads of rainwater on the bird's back. So that means that the bird's body is still dry. It's not having to deal with actually being wet. All that insulation has a corollary, meaning that when it's hot outside, the birds have to do something to cool off. And when you see eagles panting in warm weather, that's exactly what they're doing, the same way you see dogs panting when they're hot to cool off. People are often curious as they're watching the eagle camera what the adult birds are doing when they're not on the nest. And it's important to remember that during the nesting season, the adults all their activities are really focused around the nest. So if you don't see an adult in the camera, it is either off foraging, protecting the nest and the breeding territory, or probably most often perched nearby, keeping an eye on the nest and making sure it doesn't need to intervene in any way. When fledglings disappear from the nest, often they've simply matured enough that they can fly away. And these young, it varies. Some birds come back to the nest at night and roost for a period of time, and other fledglings just probably aren't that coordinated. Remember, they're trying to develop the flight skills and controls they need to land on relatively small branches. And so they might be in the vegetation nearby or moving towards foraging areas if the nest happens to not be directly along one of those rivers or other waterways. Eagle pair bonds are long-term in general. That is, successful birds, by successful I mean those that raise young to fledging age, tend to continue to remain a pair year after year as long as both of those members of the pair survive. But if a pair member dies, that dead breeder is usually replaced right away by another adult, a floater we call them in the population, that hasn't yet attained a breeding territory. So oftentimes we miss those replacements. They happen so quickly. It's important to remember too that new pairs don't have a history of being successful yet. So if new pairs are disturbed too much and do not nest successfully, they are much more likely to separate than well-established pairs. A lot of folks are interested in the lifespan of an eagle, and the answer to that question varies depending on the age of the eagle that you're talking about. Similar to most raptors, half of all nestlings die before they fledge, so they never make it out of the nest. Of those young that fledge, half of those die their first year. It's really difficult to be a raptor. It's hard to learn how to hunt, how to be protected when the weather's especially harsh, where good foraging areas are, to avoid roadways with cars and things like that. Just all the pieces of information that birds need to learn in order to survive a long time. But once a young bird has lived at least a year, then its survivorship increases. How long we expect to live is much longer. In fact, the record for a wild bald eagle, this is one not in captivity, is 35 years. Now let's talk a little bit about the details of what you might see at the nest and what's going on in these 300 nests across Pennsylvania right now. The adults have watching these nests provides you with an intimate look into the lives of birds, how they raise their young, and helps you develop an appreciation for what it takes to care for young and eggs. And although adults need to cover their eggs and nestlings to protect them, they have to be very careful to avoid damaging them. Those strong feet and talons that eagles and other raptors have could very easily damage delicate eggs. And as you watch the adults return to the nest, they'll carefully ball up their feet, work them down under the eggs, and bring their brood patch in close contact with the eggs or nests that they have at the time. Another important behavior you might see is egg rolling. Eggs actually breathe. Moisture, oxygen, and CO2 are passed between the developing embryo and the world outside through the shell. And it's important that these eggs are turned so that the embryo doesn't stick to the inside of the shell. That can lead to developmental problems and the embryo not surviving and developing normally. A brood patch is a special structure that many birds have, and in eagles it's on the breast of the bird. It is highly vascularized, meaning that they develop a wealth of blood vessels in that area, and that extra blood flow and loss of some breast feathers allows the adult to easily provide heat to those eggs and nestlings. This female white-crowned sparrow, don't want anyone to think I'm trying to pass her off as an eagle, but illustrates a brood patch really well. And you can see the thick texture of the skin, that wrinkliness, that's all the blood vessels that are feeding the area. And it's easy to imagine that providing a lot of heat when it's pressed up against those eggs. At about 35 days of incubation, an eagle egg is ready to hatch. The embryo has to work its way out of the egg on its own. The adults don't help. And it takes about a day for the embryo to work its way all the way around the egg, cracking it from the inside. At about the same time that the embryo starts working its way out, it also begins calling, or what we call pipping. It's a sound much like pip that the chick makes as it's working. You can sometimes see the adults tilting their head and appearing like they're listening to what's going on underneath them, and then lo and behold, a nestling appears soon after that. That's difficult for us to recognize, but what is easier for us to recognize is a hole that will develop right around here is an example that is also sometimes referred to as a pip, but it's the result of that embryo working on cracking the shell. Now these eggs typically are asynchronous in hatching. That means that they don't hatch at the same time, and that first nestling has an extra day or two to grow before any of its siblings hatch. If there's any sort of stress in the nest, like a shortage of food, then the older nestling is likely to try to dominate its younger nestmates. In its most extreme form, the larger nestling may kill smaller nestlings, and that's called siblicide. But when things go well and food is plentiful, multiple nestlings are often raised. Oops. Eagles eat a lot of fish, but they're opportunistic foragers. There's a lot of demands on them to bring enough food to the nest to support those nestlings. And so as you watch, you're going to see all kind of different items brought to the nest. You're going to see a lot of fish, but you're also going to see mammals and reptiles, birds, anything they can scavenge. We're always a little nervous about what kind of roadkill might show up at a nest. But again, these birds are just trying to make the best of the situation that affords itself to them. Young eagles are like most other animals. They spend most of their time eating, exercising, and especially sleeping. When folks saw this nestling last year, many of them assumed the worst, but there wasn't any sort of problem. The nestling wasn't dead, it was simply sleeping. And I'd like to take a moment to try to explain to people why we don't name these birds. The Game Commission doesn't name wild animals. It's not appropriate for them to think of as pets. And giving wild animals human characteristics is really a disservice to their wild nature. It slants the relationship that we have as we watch them. These particular adults here at the nest, or at the nest territory itself, has been observed for over a decade, and there's a lot of observational evidence to suggest that the adults have turned over through the years. But none of these eagles have been color banded, so it's difficult for us to know that with certainty. And it's important to maintain that distance. Bald eagles are wonderful wildlife ambassadors. I believe that anyone listening to this discussion can appreciate that. But we were really amazed when we've had some nests in urban sites at the outreach it's provided to people with little experience with the outdoors and giving them an opportunity to enjoy these charismatic predators. If you'd like to learn more about bald eagles, feel free to visit our website. We've got lots of information there, including the eagle etiquette, which is good information about how to be responsible when you're watching eagles' nests and how to do so without causing negative consequences to the eagles. But there's lots of other good information there too. General information on identification and how to tell the difference, especially between bald and golden eagles, as well as good places to visit or view eagles in Pennsylvania. We're really excited about the success of bald eagles, and even though we know there will be challenges in the future, the healthy population we have now allows people to identify with eagles specifically and hopefully wildlife in general, and develop an appreciation for these wonderful birds. We're looking forward to sharing eagles with generations in the future. And I'd like to thank you for joining us today for the webinar. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to do my best to try to answer them.
We do have some questions for you today, Patti. Let's see. Amy Metzger, looks like she wants to know, why did the map of PA show no eagles in Cambria County? She thinks there's one at Prince Gallitzin State Park.
Could be a glitch when I was putting dots on the map. She's absolutely right. There is a nest at Prince Gallitzin. It's awfully easy to have one of these dots a little too far over, and I debated about leaving the county lines off the map just to make it a little more vague. But you're absolutely right. There is an active nest there.
Let's see. We have a question from Earl Snyder's grandson. He would like to know what the eagle does with the empty eggshells after they have hatched. Do they eat them for calcium and nutrients?
That's a great question. An awful lot of birds do eat them for calcium. Female birds, because of laying eggs, are calcium stressed. What we've seen with bald eagles, though, is primarily they ignore them. Occasionally, they'll drop one outside of the nest. We like to see that, because if an eggshell were to slide over an egg, that would be an awful lot for an embryo to try to come through two sets of shells. But mostly for bald eagles, they just get trampled, either blown out of the nest or trampled down into the nest material.
Lisa Payne would like to know, she's watching the eagle cam, usually only one bird on nest at night. Where does the other eagle go?
The other eagle's probably perched nearby in a place where it can easily watch the nest, but where it's a little bit removed from the camera angle.
Here's one from Robert Graves. He would like to know, do adult eagles have natural enemies?
Sure they do. I mean, they're we like to say high up the food chain. So certainly, being big birds, they don't have a lot of negative encounters. But there was a video of a poor redtail that landed on an eagle's nest once, and the eagle promptly dispatched it. We occasionally get reports now, as the population is growing, of conflicts between eagles. These are probably some of those floaters I was talking about. They're mature eagles that are looking for territories, and they're basically trying to work their way into a new territory. But left to their own devices for the most part, not too much messes with an adult bald eagle.
Bob would like to know, is there federal protection for eagles?
Absolutely. Eagles are protected by the General Migratory Bird Treaty Act, but we actually have a special protection act specifically for bald and golden eagles, and that's called, you guessed it, the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act.
Right. Doug has a question about monitoring. Other than the webcam, how does the Game Commission monitor bald eagle populations in Pennsylvania?
Each year we try to check on each nest across the state to determine whether there's nesting activity or not. So we try to do that for every nest every year. Because we have so many birds now, and it's difficult to get to all the nests, we then randomly select a sample of those nests to try to calculate or determine nesting success and productivity. So for those nests, we continue to visit them and keep track of whether young fledge from the nest or not, and how many young fledge. And that allows us to make statements about the population as a whole, even though we can't track every nest every year.
All right. We've got lots of questions coming in. Margaret would like to know, do the young stay in the area once they are on their own?
In general, no. We hear advantage of that. We love to have a banded bird at a nest so we can keep track of how long it's there. But it's pretty time consuming and difficult to climb to these nests, and so we just decided we were better off not doing it.
Amy has asked if any of those original bald eagles are still left, those ones that were banded.
As of 2015, I haven't heard yet for this year, but yes, we've got a pair of birds in the northern tier, one of our early nests from the hacking program, birds that matured and set up a territory, and they're still there and doing very well.
Lots of questions. Greg is curious. I've been watching the Hanover nest and have not seen the other eagle, male I assume, at the nest in a very long time. What will happen to the eaglets if he doesn't return?
I'm going to answer that in two parts. First of all, the birds, everyone wants to be able to tell the male from the female, but it's very difficult to do. And the only time you're really confident that you're seeing both adults or have seen both adults is when they're on the nest together. But the quick answer is both birds were on the nest this morning at about 9 o'clock, give or take. So both birds are still around. The more complicated part of your question, we have had some instances where a dead eagle was found and was presumably one of the adults on a territory. And the one example I'm thinking of, the male was killed, and the female continued to incubate and, in fact, raised her young. She did end up getting a little bit lucky as far as there was some roadkill and things that she was able to take advantage of. But a new male showed up on the territory within hours of the male being found dead, and did set up residency there. He became the territorial male, but he did not appear to be helping the female raise the young in this particular instance.
Jim has a comment. He says he lives within several miles of a few different nests, and he often sees mature eagles flying over his home. How far will an eagle typically travel from the nest for food?
Most nests are within a mile or so of water, so that's about as far as they're going. But if there's a really good food source and not a good nesting site, then they will sometimes travel much further than that. You kind of need the perfect combination, though, of a good nest site far away from a good foraging site. So by and large, they're not going further than a mile.
Okay, Barbie would like to know, if the eggs are not viable, do the adults abandon the eggs after a specific period of time?
Yes, they do, but they'll often stay on the eggs much longer than we would expect them to do. In other words, the birds don't look at their watch and say, oh, it's 40 days, we're done. Sometimes they will sit on them for quite a long time.
Okay, Kenneth has a question. What happens to the bones from the mammals they catch?
I'm not quite sure. If they're small bones, they may swallow them as they're shredding the prey item. But if they're large bones that are left behind in the nest, they just lay there. That some of the images are a little macabre around the nest as the body parts build up. But eagles are not the most fastidious around their nest.
That's good. Let's see. Mary has a question. Do we know the ratio of golden eagles to bald eagles in Pennsylvania? Do they compete for food?
We don't know the ratio, or I don't know the ratio, I should say, but there are many more bald eagles than there are golden eagles. We are only recently learning how many golden eagles actually spend the winter in the Appalachians. Historically, we thought they were really a western species and that they were limited to really open habitats. And the eastern golden eagles that we're looking at seem to be much more like overgrown redtails and using openings in a forest canopy and foraging in small areas. In general, though, bald eagles and golden eagles aren't competing for food. They're foraging in a little bit different places, and they're specializing in different sorts of prey items. Now, that being said, they're both opportunistic. So if they find a roadkill deer, they are both going to sit on it or try to sit on it and eat it. And you might see some conflicts then. But in general, no, there's not a lot of conflict there.
All right, Jenny would like to know how high up in the tree the Hanover nest is, and what about the average nest? Hanover's about 75.
Yeah. So the Hanover nest is about 75 feet up, and we don't regularly actually measure height of these nests. Again, partially because we're trying not to get too close to them. But I'm going to say, they are usually pretty high up in the trees. They have no predisposition, at least in this part of the country where they have the opportunity to get off the ground, to be low. So they're probably a minimum of 30 to 50 feet off the ground, and then beyond that, as high as those large tree limbs will allow them to get.
Let's see. Sarah is wondering how fast they can fly.
Oh, Sarah, you must like peregrines a lot, because that's always the question we get with peregrine falcons. I can't give you an exact number, but I can tell you that as I've watched peregrine, as I've watched bald eagles while they're carrying nesting material and stuff, they move at a pretty good clip considering they're carrying something that really destroys their aerodynamics. They pick up sticks a lot larger than you would think they could carry and move them pretty good distances. So I guess I would call them, good strong flyers and decent speeds, but they're not going to be on the scale of a peregrine.
Fern would like to know, are we allowed to keep eagle feathers?
Absolutely not. You can get in a lot of trouble if you have any eagle parts unless you already have a permit that makes that legal. It's a hard thing for people to appreciate, but that rule is for the eagle's own protection. So yeah, do yourself a favor and eagles. Don't keep any feathers.
I'm going to combine two questions here. Is there a risk to nests from great horned owls or snakes?
The short answer is yes, there's always a risk, but I think it's pretty minimal. An eagle would be just as likely to take a snake or a great horned owl even as a snack if it got too close to the nest. That red tail I mentioned earlier, that the eagle and red tails and great horned owls are about the same size. It did not take that eagle 30 seconds to kill the red tail that made the mistake of landing on the nest. Great horned owls might have a slight advantage over a red tail in that they might approach the nest at night, but some of the night camera work that we've seen, eagles have chased things like raccoons out of their nest, and I don't see them being any less aggressive with a great horned owl.
John would like to know where the eagles go when they migrate.
Most of the eagles in Pennsylvania stay in the state. They move when the water freezes to open water. That's why we get good concentrations at some of the hydroelectric dams in the winter. But birds that are further north, say in eastern Canada, do tend to go south in the winter. And birds actually that breed in Florida sometimes move north in the summer because their breeding is out of synchrony with each other. So birds are moving basically all up into northern Canada and then down into the southern U.S. But a lot of the Pennsylvania birds stay around most of the year.
All right, we have a lot of questions about the vocalizations. Do we know what any of the sounds they make mean? Do they call for their mate?
Bald eagles have several calls that you've probably heard if you've been watching one of the cameras, and actually yes to all of those. They'll use contact calls to let their mate know what's going on. When you ask, if I can't see a bird, what is it off doing? If the mate that's on the nest, for example, sees a potential predator or another eagle, a competitor, it might call out both to warn that intruder to go away, but also to make sure its mate is aware that there's a threat to the territory, so that then it can intervene in what's going on.
Nice. We're just about out of time here. We have a question about when they roll the eggs. They also disturb the straw underneath sometimes. Why is that?
They're just moving the straw around, I think, just to try to create a nice, I hate to say nest, but a nice little depression, a space to cradle that egg. And, you can imagine that as they push their bill down and roll that egg, they might even unintentionally catch a little bit of the fine material in the nest and move it. Well, then they want to get it back down in place where it belongs. But you can also watch them move small and large pieces of the nest around as they seem to not really be happy where it is periodically in the nest. So I think there's a little of that going on as well.
Let's see. Meredith has a question about lead. Is there still an issue with lead?
We're always going to be concerned with contaminants when it comes to birds of prey. We have a history of having different kinds of toxins in the environment, and those causing problems for species that are susceptible. So I would say, yes, we must always be vigilant.
All right, and let's see. Let me see if I can find one more here. Looks like there's a couple people that still have questions about sharing the responsibilities of incubation between the male and female. Just talk about that a little bit more, and I think then we'll wrap it up.
Sure. I didn't actually see those questions, but I'll talk about it in general. The male and the female both incubate the eggs and the young nestlings. We believe that the female probably does more of the incubation simply because she has a larger brood patch, and it takes energy to convert that tissue from kind of regular adult eagle breast tissue to brood patch tissue. You have to grow those blood vessels and drop those feathers and regrow those feathers after the nesting season. So it makes a certain amount of sense that if she has a larger brood patch, she's spending more time doing it. But because they spell each other and give each other turns off the nest, basically it's important that the male contribute enough to allow the female to get off the nest, forage for herself, and take care of herself. She's got to continue to preen her own feathers and work her muscles and be ready. So as soon as she's no longer on that nest, that both adults can be bringing as much food back to the nest as possible.
All right. Well, we're sorry we haven't been able to get to everyone's questions today. I'd like to thank Patti for sharing her expertise with us. Maybe we'll be able to get her to come back if we have young eaglets fledging the nest mid-June. I'd like to thank all of our participants for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us, and hope you'll visit us again to learn more about Pennsylvania wildlife in upcoming webinars. So until then, we hope you're able to get outside and enjoy some of Pennsylvania's great outdoors. And we'll be posting a recording, probably within the next 15 minutes for folks that would like to listen later. Have a great day.